Hello, witaj na kanale Ogarnij swój angielski, który powstał z myślą o pomocy w nauce języka angielskiego. Ponieważ lubię pisać, a w nauce języka obcego również przydatne jest obcowanie z różnymi tekstami, napisałem esej, dzięki któremu będziesz miał możliwość poszerzenia swojego słownictwa, szczególnie dla osób na nieco wyższym poziomie zaawansowania. Po zapoznaniu się z treścią zachęcam również do dyskusji i podzielenia się swoją opinią. Tekst będzie czytany w języku angielskim, natomiast napisy na ekranie będą zarówno w języku polskim, jak i angielskim. W miarę możliwości szczególnie zachęcam do jednoczesnego słuchania i śledzenia tekstu wzrokiem, ponieważ dzięki temu Twój mózg będzie mógł lepiej zapamiętywać omawiane treści. A teraz czas na esej.
Lately, while I was listening to one of the internet podcasts, one of the speakers recommended reading Viktor Emil Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. Generally, I enjoy listening to wise people and eagerly reach for books they recommend because numerous times after reading a certain book, knowledge or emotions remained within me, changing my life forever. The same applies to Viktor Frankl's book, and I honestly believe it should be one of the mandatory reads for every contemporary teenager, especially for those who complain about life and suffer due to rainy weekend weather or their favorite football team losing in important matches. I think this book could embarrass many people. At least it was the case for me because it touches on aspects of life that concern each of us, the search for happiness and finding meaning in our lives.
The author's story is particularly vivid because this man was an Austrian Jew living in Vienna during the Second World War, which for obvious reasons meant a highly probable deportation to concentration camps and extermination. This was also the case for Wiktor Frankl. During his captivity, he endured human suffering, torture, hunger, filth, and daily humiliations. Yet he managed to maintain optimism and, thanks to various twists of fate, survived. His experience as a psychiatrist helped him observe how people behave in the face of death, and how despite such humiliating conditions and even degrading treatment from prison guards, prisoners still managed to bring forth goodness, giving each other encouragement, making sacrifices like sharing their already minimal food rations, or finding inner peace in enjoying the presence of a growing tree nearby. As it turned out, there were also guards in his story who tried to help the prisoners as much as they could, as well as one commander who secretly bought medicine for the prisoners from his own pocket. The greatest conclusion about people that emerge from Viktor Frankl's story is this: there are two kinds of people in the world, the decent and the indecent. Regardless of who the individuals he encountered on his journey were, guards, fellow prisoners, medical staff, or administrators, some could be mean, wicked, and sadistic, while others tried everything in their power to do something, anything to help. I must admit that reading this book can truly make one feel bad about how people were treated in those conditions and how little their lives were valued. However, that was not the author's intention, not to focus on the sufferings experienced by people there, but to show that even in such conditions of life, in daily confrontation with death, it was possible to find something worth living for and even necessary. Death in the camps was so commonplace that people became desensitized to it. Prisoners fighting for their lives died so frequently that those who remained alive long enough could assess whether someone was facing death in the near future based on their behavior. Surprisingly, the symptoms of these deaths were not physical injuries, diseases, or heavy labor, but rather the prisoner's attitude towards the surrounding reality. When a prisoner was psychologically shattered, they refused to get up in the morning, stopped wanting to eat, or even attended to their physiological needs outside. Simply put, when a person lost faith in the meaning of life and lost sight of any purpose, faith that anything good awaited them in life, death came to them very quickly. Wiser prisoners, aware of the situation, tried to do everything to encourage each other, to comfort each other, or do anything just to want to survive another day. But how do you find any purpose in life in conditions where you are extremely exhausted, hungry, living in filth, beaten and humiliated every day, and at the same time working hard in sub-zero temperatures, often without being particularly educated or morally developed individuals? Well, the author came to the conclusion that in such a situation, the only way is to give value to your suffering and allow it to shape us, to make us better people. As the author mentioned earlier, there are two kinds of people, decent and indecent, regardless of the positions they currently hold, their race or nationality, and being in certain conditions, they somewhat decide what kind of person they want to be in that situation. Likewise, everyone can define themselves and decide how they want to embrace this suffering and whether they agree to accept it as an aspect that allows them to develop as human beings. Of course, such an approach often carries a spiritual dimension where the afflicted individual becomes someone special before their God, able to suffer in the name of their faith. However, it can also have more mundane aspects, such as the desire to sacrifice oneself, knowing that by doing so, we improve the conditions of someone else's life, as the camp prisoners did by giving away their meal or a piece of warm clothing. In this way, by wanting to do anything good for our surroundings, despite our own suffering, we can continue to thrive internally, even as the world around us burns or simply dies. In concluding this form of my expression, I would like to add that in agreement with the author of the book, I acknowledge that not every suffering will have value, and not every suffering will contribute to our development. There are types of suffering that not only fail to benefit us, but also hinder our personal growth. And this is suffering for show. There are people also in my surroundings who exacerbate their suffering by their own choice. They either complain about everything, or they claim they're going through the worst period of their life. It often happens that I observe people wanting to draw attention to themselves, exploit someone's empathy or willingness to help, to torment them with tales of their own misfortune, which they themselves deepen by their own choice. Such individuals, instead of setting higher goals in life, put themselves on a pedestal, a person plagued in every way. Such suffering is most often either a mental illness, low self-esteem, or a deep-seated disorder screaming for attention. In no case would I expect growth from a person who only thinks about how to feed what screams inside them instead of trying to address it. Therefore, one can confidently conclude that suffering can spiritually enrich us, and we can even find meaning or solace in it when faced with it not by our own choice but by life circumstances or incidents that have pushed us into that situation. What do you think? Do you think it's helpful to find meaning in suffering and use it to grow personally? What's been your experience with tough times, and what have you learned from them? How do you see the idea of sorting people into good and bad categories, like the author suggests? Does this kind of sorting make sense to you? What do you think? What do you think about how prisoners dealt with suffering and death, like the author describes? Do you think their approach could work today? What might be the challenges? The author talks about people who make their own suffering worse. What do you think about that? How could someone like that be helped?
Gratuluję Ci dotarcia do końca tego odcinka, bo to oznacza, że się przykładasz. Jeżeli film Ci się spodobał, pamiętaj, aby dać łapkę w górę i zasubskrybować kanał, żeby nie umknęły Ci kolejne ciekawe materiały do nauki języka angielskiego. Daj również znać w komentarzu, czy takie materiały są dla Ciebie pomocne. Do zobaczenia w kolejnym odcinku.